At the wedding, my fiancé's ex walked in, screamed, "I love you." She kissed him and ran. This is the day she became my prisoner, financially and legally. I woke up that morning with a strange kind of stillness in my chest, the sort of calm that shouldn't exist on a wedding day. Everyone always said nerves would take over, that I'd feel my stomach turning or my knees weak. Instead, I felt alert, almost detached, like I was watching a movie of my own life. The tuxedo hanging on the closet door didn't feel like a costume. It felt like armor. Elise's family had insisted on a traditional church ceremony. White flowers everywhere, rented musicians, photographers stationed like vultures around the pews. I had paid for almost all of it, though Elise's parents liked to parade around as if they had spared no expense. I had the receipts filed away at home, every deposit, every payment, every contract. That detail would become more important than I realized in the hours ahead. I arrived at the church early with Joel, my best man, who had been my friend since high school. He was buzzing with excitement, cracking jokes, adjusting his tie, checking the rings in his pocket. I nodded and smiled at the right times, but my eyes kept scanning the building, memorizing where everything was, where people moved. I didn't know why I was so focused, but something in me whispered that today wasn't going to follow the script. By the time the first guests filled the pews, whispers of Elise's dress already floated through the crowd. I stood at the front with Joel, shaking hands, nodding politely to her cousins and old friends, and waiting for the music to begin. Elise's family sat like they were royalty, her mother fanning herself dramatically while her father boasted to anyone who would listen about how his daughter had married up. He had hated me at first, but when he realized how much money I had, his tune changed. That smugness would evaporate soon enough. The organ began, and everyone rose. Elise appeared at the entrance, arm in arm with her father. She was stunning, of course, lace gown, veil floating behind her, bouquet gripped tight in her hands. I looked at her and tried to imagine that this was the moment where everything should have locked into place. Instead, my brain hummed like a machine, noting how tense she seemed, how her father's jaw was clenched as if holding something back. They reached me, her father handed her off, and the ceremony began. The pastor's voice droned on, predictable words echoing through the rafters. Elise avoided my eyes, staring straight ahead, lips pressed together. I told myself it was nerves. But when she finally glanced at me, her expression was strange, a mix of guilt and desperation, as if she were balancing on the edge of a cliff and hoping I wouldn't notice. The pastor had just begun the vows when the doors at the back of the church slammed open. The sound reverberated like a gunshot, freezing everyone in place. Heads whipped around, gasps filled the air. A man strode down the aisle, uninvited, unshaven, his tie hanging loose like he had dressed in a hurry. I recognized him instantly from old photos Elise had once left lying around. Carter, her ex. "I love you, Elise." His voice cracked through the silence, raw and desperate. "I can't let this happen." The room erupted. Guests whispered. Some stood, others craned their necks to see better. Elise's mother clutched her chest like she might faint, while her father looked ready to strangle someone. Joel muttered a curse under his breath, but I didn't move. I stood perfectly still, watching Elise. She froze, bouquet trembling in her hands. For a moment, I thought she would scream at him to leave. But then something shifted in her eyes, and I knew. Before anyone could stop her, Elise dropped the bouquet, ran down the aisle toward Carter, and pressed her lips to his in front of everyone. The kiss wasn't long, but it was enough. The gasps turned into a roar of voices, people standing, others shouting. The pastor stood dumbstruck, his open Bible sagging in his hands. My fiancée, no, not fiancée anymore, tore herself away from me in front of 100 witnesses, and she ran out the doors with Carter at her side. Joel looked at me, horrified, waiting for me to collapse, to rage, to chase after them. But I didn't move. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I turned, calmly walked down the steps behind the altar, and slipped into the side room where the groomsmen had prepared earlier. I closed the door behind me, silence swallowing the chaos outside. My phone was in my pocket. My lawyer's number was already saved on speed dial. I pressed it, and when he answered, I didn't even give him time to ask questions. I told him everything had happened just as we suspected might. Elise had bolted. The marriage never legally began. But the contract stood. Every one of them. He asked if I wanted to chase her down, if I wanted to cancel everything. I said no. I wanted the process to keep rolling exactly as it was. Deposits, fees, penalties, all of it in motion. Every contract bore Elise's name beside mine, and she was about to learn what it meant to run away from something while still being tied to it. I slipped back into the church as whispers turned into open arguments among the guests. Elise's parents tried to calm the chaos, insisting there must have been some mistake, while Joel attempted to steer people outside. The pastor looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I stepped up to the microphone that had been set up for the vows. My voice was steady, almost too calm for the situation. I thanked everyone for coming, said the ceremony was canceled, and invited them to enjoy the reception if they still wished. Gasps spread again, but I didn't wait for questions. I walked straight down the aisle, past Elise's shocked relatives, past guests whispering behind their hands, and out into the daylight. The photographers snapped pictures as if they couldn't believe what was happening, but I didn't shield my face. Let them capture it. Let there be proof that Elise had chosen to humiliate herself. Outside, Joel caught up with me, still wide-eyed. He asked me if I was okay, if I needed a drink, if I wanted to go after them. I shook my head. There was nothing to chase. Elise had run straight into a trap she didn't even realize had been set months ago when she begged me to sign everything jointly, to make her feel included. The irony almost made me laugh. She thought she had escaped. She thought she had won some grand romantic gesture by leaping into Carter's arms in front of everyone. She didn't know that her name was now tied to thousands in penalties, that her parents' smug smiles would vanish when they saw the contracts, that Carter had debts she had unknowingly agreed to shoulder with him. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't collapse. I walked to the car, loosened my tie, and called the first vendor on the list, the reception hall manager. I introduced myself, confirmed the cancellation, and told them to forward all paperwork to my attorney. The manager hesitated, asked if Elise knew. I said she would, very soon. By the time I drove away from the church, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Joel, my parents, Elise's family, friends, even unknown numbers from gossip-hungry guests. I ignored them all. My focus was razor-sharp. Elise might think she had chosen freedom, but she had only traded a ceremony for a cage she had built herself. The day wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. The church emptied slowly, like a stadium after a game that ended in chaos. Guests shuffled out whispering, some angry, some gleeful about the gossip they'd carry home. By the time I reached the reception hall, the staff already knew. Word spread faster than I expected. Elise and Carter had vanished into the city, probably thinking they had escaped the storm. What they didn't realize was that the storm wasn't outside anymore. It was inside every contract they had signed their names to. The first step was simple. Cancel everything that hadn't been used yet. Reception hall, catering, photography, florist, band, honeymoon reservations. Joel insisted on staying with me, worried I might crack, but he quickly realized I wasn't breaking down. I was working. He followed me from desk to desk like a silent bodyguard as I walked through the venue, talking to managers, pulling out my phone to email documents, and collecting receipts. At the reception hall office, I asked the manager to print the signed contract. He hesitated, probably unsure if he was allowed to. I leaned across the counter and pointed at Elise's signature beside mine. 2 names, side by side. She had begged me to include her on everything, to prove we were equal partners. Equal partners meant equal responsibility, equal liability. The manager scanned the page nervously, then handed me a cancellation form. I signed it, slid it back, and told him to forward all financial penalties directly to my attorney. Joel raised his eyebrows as we walked out. He said he didn't realize weddings worked like this, that someone could be tied to debts even if the marriage never happened. I told him that was the point. Elise had bound herself long before she thought about running. By the time we finished with the caterer and florist, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. He wanted to meet immediately at his office downtown. I drove straight there. The city traffic felt like background noise, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind sorting through each piece of leverage I had collected. His office smelled of leather and old books, the kind of place where people lose or gain entire futures. He closed the door behind us and asked me to explain everything in detail. I laid it out step by step: Carter's entrance, Elise's choice, the public collapse, and my immediate cancellations. Then I handed him the stack of contracts, receipts, and signed agreements I had gathered. He flipped through them slowly, nodding, occasionally raising an eyebrow. When he looked up, he said something that confirmed what I already suspected. Elise had not only tied herself financially to the wedding, but also to our shared account, which she had used to withdraw funds without my knowledge. He slid a statement across the desk, one I hadn't seen before. Elise had pulled several $1,000s in cash over the past 2 months, always late at night, always in small chunks. My stomach tightened as I read it. That wasn't shopping money. That wasn't stress spending. That was Carter's lifeline. The lawyer leaned back, his voice calm but sharp. If Elise had used our joint funds to pay off Carter's debts, that opened an entirely different path, one that included fraud, possible criminal charges if we pushed hard enough. He asked if I wanted to pursue it immediately. I told him not yet. It was better to let her think she had the upper hand, Better to let her sink further before the floor collapsed beneath her. That night, Elise's parents called me. Her father's voice was stern, trying to sound authoritative, but I could hear the panic underneath. He demanded to know why I had humiliated his daughter, why I had walked out instead of forgiving her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told him to check the email I had just sent. In that email sat copies of the contracts, the cancellation notices, and Elise's signature on every page. I didn't attach commentary. I didn't need to. The numbers spoke louder than I could. When her father opened them, silence stretched across the line. Then he hung up without a word. Joel asked me later if I felt guilty about sending those documents to her family. I told him no. Elise had made her choice in front of everyone. Now she had to live with the consequences in front of everyone too. 2 days later, the first debt notice arrived at Elise's apartment. I didn't send it. The companies did, automatically. She tried calling me, but I ignored her. Instead, I watched as her story began to twist in the public eye. She told her parents that I had abandoned her, that I had staged the whole thing to embarrass her. She told her friends that Carter had been her true love all along, that she was finally free. But freedom didn't look like debt collectors at your door. Freedom didn't look like bank statements with missing funds and lawyers circling like sharks. To strengthen the case, I hired a private investigator recommended by my lawyer. The man specialized in financial trails, the kind of quiet detective who could find out where money went and who benefited. Within a week, he handed me a report with photographs, receipts, and witness accounts. Elise had been slipping Carter money for months. Rent payments, bar tabs, even utility bills in his name. The report included one detail that made even Joel whistle under his breath. Carter had pawned a watch Elise bought for him, a watch purchased with money pulled from our joint account. He had sold it for less than half its value just to pay off a gambling debt. I stared at the page, my mind racing. Elise hadn't just humiliated me. She had subsidized the man who humiliated me. She had drained our funds for him, leaving a paper trail as clear as day. I forwarded the report to my lawyer. His reply came within minutes, airtight. If Elise tried to sue, if she tried to spin the narrative publicly, we could counter with evidence that would not only discredit her, but also expose Carter's leeching. The most satisfying part was how quiet the trap remained. Elise didn't yet know the full scope of what I had uncovered. She thought she could outpace the humiliation with romantic theatrics. She thought her story of true love would shield her from consequences. Meanwhile, every signature, every withdrawal, every debt shifted the walls of her cage tighter. The final blow of that week came when Elise's father showed up at my office unannounced. He looked older, worn down, his pride shredded. He asked me quietly if it was true, if his daughter really owed all that money, if she really had tied herself to Carter's debts. I didn't even speak. I slid the investigator's report across the desk and let him read in silence. When he finished, he folded the papers, shoved them back at me, and muttered that she was no longer his responsibility. His hands shook as he said it. For a man who once paraded Elise as his crown jewel, to disown her, that quickly revealed just how fragile their loyalty had been. That night, Elise texted me for the first time since the wedding. She begged me to meet, to talk, to work something out. The words were messy, frantic, as if typed through tears. Joel read over my shoulder and asked if I'd respond. I told him yes, but not with forgiveness. I arranged a meeting at a neutral place, a downtown cafe with glass walls, the kind of spot where every passerby could see who was inside. I wanted her exposed, not sheltered. She arrived looking different already, hair unkempt, eyes swollen, clothes wrinkled. Carter didn't come with her. That told me more than anything. She tried to launch into apologies, excuses, explanations. I cut her off by sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the contracts, the bank withdrawals, the investigator's photos. She flipped through them, her face draining of color with every page. When she looked up, her lips trembled. She whispered that she didn't know what to do. I leaned forward and told her the truth. She had already done everything. She had signed. She had spent. She had chosen. There was no undoing it now. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of cups clinking behind the counter. She lowered her head, and for the first time, I saw her understand. The kiss at the wedding wasn't freedom. It was the first link in a chain she had clasped around her own wrists. I left her there, staring at the papers, knowing the weight of what she had done was only beginning to settle. The morning after our meeting at the cafe, Elise tried to call again. I ignored her, but when she began leaving voicemails, I listened. They shifted tone with each message. First came pleading, then anger, then threats of lawyers, then sobbing apologies. It was like watching a person cycle through all stages of grief in real time. Except the corpse she mourned wasn't me. It was the illusion of freedom she thought she had gained by running with Carter. I knew better than to answer. Instead, I made another appointment with my lawyer. By now, the folder of evidence had grown thicker. Copies of bank withdrawals, signed contracts, the investigator's photos of Carter pawning gifts. My lawyer skimmed through the new material and leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. He said if Elise tried to sue, she would be destroyed in court. If she tried to declare bankruptcy, her ties to Carter's debts would drag her under anyway. He asked if I wanted to file a preemptive suit against her. I told him not yet. It was better to let her spiral further before tightening the rope. The rope tightened faster than I expected. That week, Carter reappeared, not at my door, but in Elise's neighborhood. The investigator caught photos of him sneaking in and out of her apartment building at odd hours. At first, I thought it meant they were still together. But the report included something stranger. Carter was always leaving with bags, sometimes small electronics, once even a television. The investigator dug deeper. Carter had been using Elise's apartment as his personal pawn shop. He convinced her to cover his bills, then stripped her home of anything valuable to sell. The photographs were damning. Carter loading Elise's belongings into his car, Carter handing over jewelry to a pawnbroker, Carter walking out of her building with a new gaming console under his arm. The realization sank in slowly. Elise hadn't just betrayed me. She had betrayed herself. She had chosen a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a resource to exploit until empty. I decided it was time to confront them both. Through a mutual acquaintance, one of Elise's cousins who had always disliked Carter, I arranged a meeting. The cousin invited Elise under the pretense of family reconciliation, and Carter tagged along. When they arrived at the cafe I'd chosen, they didn't know I'd be there. Elise froze when she saw me sitting at the corner table with my lawyer and the investigator beside me. Carter, arrogant as ever, smirked and slid into the booth, throwing his arm over the back of the seat like he owned the place. Elise sat stiffly, eyes darting between us. I didn't waste time. I slid a new folder across the table. Inside were the photographs of Carter leaving her apartment with her belongings. Elise grabbed the pages, flipping faster and faster, her face draining of color. Carter laughed it off at first, saying it was staged, but when the investigator produced timestamps, receipts, and the pawnbroker's sworn statement, his laughter cracked. My lawyer spoke then, his voice calm and cutting. He explained that Elise's financial ties to Carter, the cash withdrawals, the payments, could be interpreted as fraudulent misuse of a joint account. Carter's involvement made him complicit. If I pressed charges, both could face consequences. Elise broke first. She turned on Carter, voice shaking, demanding to know if it was true. Carter didn't bother denying it anymore. He leaned back, shrugged, and said she should have known better. He told her she was naive, that she'd been useful, but nothing more. The cafe fell into silence, the words hanging like smoke. Elise stared at him, tears welling, her hands trembling as she clutched the photographs. The man she had chosen over me, the man she had run to in front of 100 witnesses, had just admitted she was nothing more than a wallet with legs. I leaned forward and reminded her that every penny she had funneled to Carter had been traced. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every bill. She wasn't his lover. She was his financier. And financiers carry liability. Carter stood suddenly, muttering something about not needing this, and stormed out. Elise called after him, but he didn't turn back. The door slammed behind him, and she was left sitting there, shaking, surrounded by the very people who had just dismantled her illusions. My lawyer told her plainly that unless she cooperated, unless she signed an agreement acknowledging her responsibility for the wedding debts and the misuse of funds, I would pursue full charges. Elise stared down at the papers he laid before her, her tears splattering onto the signatures she had once thought bound her to a future with me. Now they bound her to debt and humiliation. She didn't sign that night. She stormed out instead, swearing she'd find another lawyer, swearing she'd fight. But the next morning, my investigator called with another update. Carter had skipped town. His apartment was empty. His phone disconnected. He had taken what he could and vanished. Elise was left alone, the weight of everything pressing down with no one to share it. Her father refused to answer her calls. Her mother sent a single text. "You made your bed." The gossip spread quickly through her social circle. People who once admired her relationship now whispered about Carter's betrayal, about the debt notices, about her family's cold abandonment. Photos of Carter pawning her belongings circulated online, posted by someone who worked at the shop. The humiliation was no longer private. It was public, viral, impossible to hide. One evening, Joel showed me a post from one of Elise's old friends. It described the scene at the wedding, the kiss, the fallout, and ended with a single brutal line. She traded security for a con man, and now she's paying both ways. The comments were merciless. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But then I remembered the look on her face as she dropped the bouquet, The way she had chosen to kiss Carter in front of everyone instead of facing the vows she had agreed to. Pity evaporated. Instead, I prepared the next move. My lawyer drafted the official notice, a demand for repayment of half the wedding expenses, plus restitution for the unauthorized withdrawals from our joint account. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the legal weight pressing down, about showing Elise that every step she took away from me only pulled the chains tighter. When the notice arrived at her door, she finally cracked. She called, not with threats this time, but with surrender. Her voice was hollow, defeated. She asked what I wanted. I told her the truth. I wanted nothing from her personally. But legally, she owed me. Financially, she was responsible. The law didn't care about her feelings, her romantic gestures, or her sob stories. The law cared about signatures, contracts, and evidence. And I had all three. The next meeting was arranged at a notary's office. Elise arrived looking 10 years older, her shoulders slumped, her makeup streaked. She signed the documents without protest. The notary stamped each page, the sound echoing like a gavel. With every stamp, Elise's face seemed to sink further, as if each thud nailed the coffin of the life she thought she had chosen. When it was over, she whispered that she wished she had never met Carter. I didn't respond. Some mistakes are too loud for sympathy. That night, I walked home through the city, the cool air biting at my skin. I thought about how quickly everything had shifted, from a wedding day meant to unite families to a legal battle that left Elise isolated, humiliated, and indebted. But I also knew it wasn't over. She still had cards she might try to play. She still had pride, and pride makes people reckless. And I was ready for the recklessness. I was ready for the next move. Because Elise wasn't just my former fiancée anymore. She was my prisoner, not in chains of steel, but in chains of ink and paper, signatures and debts. Chains she had fastened herself. After Elise signed the notary papers, I thought maybe that would be the end. A signature should have sealed her fate. But people don't surrender gracefully when they're cornered. They thrash, they bite, they throw themselves against the walls of the trap, even if it only makes the trap tighter. Elise was no different. 2 weeks after she acknowledged the debts, I received notice that she had filed a civil suit against me. Her claim accused me of orchestrating psychological manipulation, of abandoning her at the altar deliberately to inflict humiliation, and of coercing her into signing repayment agreements. Her lawyer framed it as emotional abuse, trying to twist the narrative so she would look like the victim. Joel slammed the letter down on my desk, furious on my behalf. But I didn't lose my composure. I simply forwarded it to my lawyer. He laughed when he read it. He said Elise had hired a desperate attorney, the kind who lives off frivolous cases hoping for settlements. He told me that if Elise wanted a war in court, we would give her one, with evidence so sharp it would cut her to pieces. The court date arrived a month later. I wore the same suit I had chosen for the wedding. Joel joked that it was poetic, but I didn't laugh. Elise walked in with her attorney, her face pale and tight. Her family didn't sit behind her. Her parents had refused to come, and her siblings kept their distance. She was alone except for a man paid to argue for her. The proceedings began with her lawyer painting a picture of me as a cold manipulator, someone who staged the wedding collapse to ruin her reputation. He claimed I had set up the contracts intentionally to trap her, that I had used wealth and power to crush a young woman in love. He even dared to mention Carter as the man she had chosen freely, framing it as a love story interrupted by my supposed cruelty. I sat silently while he spoke, my hands folded neatly, my eyes fixed on Elise. She avoided my gaze, staring at the floor like a child caught in a lie. When it was my lawyer's turn, the tone shifted. He stood calmly, laid a thick folder on the bench, and began unraveling Elise's story piece by piece. He showed the signed contracts, each with Elise's name beside mine. He displayed the bank statements with unauthorized withdrawals, highlighting the times and dates. Then he introduced the investigator's report, photographs of Carter leaving Elise's apartment with her belongings, receipts from pawn shops, sworn testimony from the brokers. The judge's expression tightened as each piece of evidence stacked higher. Elise's lawyer tried to object, but every objection fell flat against the weight of documented proof. Then came the final blow. My lawyer revealed that Carter, the supposed true love, was still legally married to another woman in another city. The investigator had uncovered the marriage license and current records. Elise gasped aloud, covering her mouth, as the truth settled over the courtroom like ash. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, realizing his case had just disintegrated. The judge asked Elise if she had known about Carter's marriage. She shook her head, tears spilling, muttering that she hadn't known, that she thought he loved her. The judge's response was blunt. Her ignorance didn't erase her actions, her signatures, or her financial responsibilities. By the time the ruling was delivered, Elise looked hollow. The court dismissed her claims entirely. Instead, the judge affirmed that she was legally bound to half the wedding expenses and ordered restitution for the misused funds. Garnishment of wages was authorized if she failed to pay. She left the courtroom with her head bowed, her lawyer trailing behind, both looking like they had been crushed under the same stone. Joel slapped my back outside the courthouse, grinning. He said I had just witnessed the cleanest destruction of a false narrative he had ever seen. But I didn't smile. This wasn't about joy. It was about justice. In the weeks that followed, Elise's world collapsed further. Debt collectors called daily. Her credit score plummeted. She lost her job at a marketing firm after rumors about the trial spread among her coworkers. Employers don't like hiring someone embroiled in fraud investigations, even if no formal charges were filed. She applied for smaller jobs, but found doors closing faster than she could knock. Her social circle disintegrated too. Friends who once envied her engagement now mocked her behind her back. Photos from the wedding day circulated online with captions calling her a runaway bride, a conman's fool, a cautionary tale. Strangers commented on her posts, reminding her of the kiss, the betrayal, the debts. She deleted her accounts, but the damage lingered. Meanwhile, I moved forward quietly. I sold the house we had chosen together, cleared the shared account of what remained, and cut every lingering tie. I didn't flaunt my victory. I didn't chase headlines. But word spread anyway, and people began to look at me differently. Not as a victim of humiliation, but as someone who turned betrayal into control. The irony was sharp. Elise had kissed Carter in front of everyone to prove she was free, to prove she chose passion over duty. But passion evaporated, and duty remained. She became my prisoner not in body, but in consequence, her life shackled to debts she had chosen with her own signature. Every paycheck she earned would bleed toward repayment. Every attempt to rebuild would carry the shadow of that courtroom ruling. Months later, Joel and I ran into one of Elise's old friends at a bar. She told us Elise was working part-time at a retail store, barely scraping by. Carter had vanished entirely, rumored to be running schemes in another state. Elise was left cleaning up the wreckage, abandoned by the man she destroyed herself for. Joel asked me if I felt satisfied hearing that. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said I didn't need satisfaction. I needed certainty. And certainty had already been delivered. Through ink, through evidence, through the judgment that tied Elise to her own choices. The last time I saw her was by accident, months later. I was walking downtown when I spotted her outside a cafe, the same one where she had first faced the evidence. She looked thinner, her clothes cheaper, her eyes dulled. She noticed me, froze, then quickly turned away. For a split second, I saw the memory flicker across her face. The wedding day, the kiss, the escape she thought was freedom. But she didn't walk away free that day. She walked into a cage. And cages don't open just because the prisoner regrets walking inside.